Afternoon, everybody. Nick McCreary here, co-founder of Jobs for Football, on another Jobs for Football podcast. Today, we are delighted to be joined with Nigel McCarthy, head of performance at USL Championship side in the US, Lexington Sporting Club. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning from America. Good afternoon in England.
How is the weather? Everything nice?
Now good. It was really cold up to minus 15 degrees Celsius, but now it's back to
Wow.
mid tens, so we're good.
Awesome. A little bit different to Malta then.
Yeah, had to get used to that.
Awesome, mate. Brilliant. No, listen, from our side, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a bit of Nigel's background, his experience in Malta within multi-sport, what brought him to the USA, and then some technical questions at the end, which I'm looking forward to hearing his insight too. So back in 2014, Nigel, that's when your kind of journey started. You came and educated yourself in the UK, returned back to Malta. And what kind of sparked your passion within strength and conditioning? And how did Malta kind of shape that professional potential career moving forward?
Sure. So after I finished my sports science in London, which was a really good experience at St. Mary's, um, I had to go back to Malta to obviously develop the sports there and help with it. So one of the major issues we had is that we had a lot of technical coaches in many sports, which were really good, but they were not supported. So the supporting structure was not around the technical coaches. So meaning the psychologist, the nutritionist, the fitness coaches, there was nothing helping the technical coaches, which generally they would do everything themselves. So when I looked at what I could do, I was interested in a lot of pathways. So biomechanics, physiology. I was all interested in all of these. So strength and conditioning sort of hits all of these aspects and encapsulates all these avenues to get the athlete ready for the sport. So that's the major reason why I went into SNC.
And what really in terms of the actual driving force of yourself in Malta, was that the kind of main catalyst? You didn't feel that there was enough kind of supporting mechanism within strength and conditioning and performance at this time,
Yes. So
and you saw
so
that kind of niche.
so being an athlete myself, I used to struggle a lot with coordination and rhythm. So when I was competing myself, I always tried to seek some help further out than the training we were getting. So maybe I used to go to compete in weightlifting to work on power, dance to work on coordination, and whatnot to help me within my sport. And there was not the support. So this was one of the main reasons I didn't want this to keep on happening in Malta. I wanted to make sure that the athletes were being prepared. Also, the reason that there's a lot of talent on the island as well, but it was not being cured enough or taken or shaped in the right way to its full potential.
And I think that's a big thing. I agree. There is so much talent in Malta, and it's just kind of implementing those professional structures. Like I say, not just on the pitch, but within the sports and sports science side of things, within the psychology side of things, and giving them that platform to really kick on and align themselves with other countries and giving them a fair chance, really, moving forward.
Totally.
So now you're working towards your PhD at St Mary's Uni. How has that academic research kind of complemented your practical work day to day? Everybody says, okay, I'm book smart, but how has that book knowledge transferred into kind of practical day to day?
Okay, so when you're working on the PhD, you're always trying to seek something new, something missing, and you're trying change that practical missing thing that we found. So what we started in Malta, for example, with the girls football, my first chapter of it is looking at the characteristics of performance between the top four and bottom four teams in Malta, because the women's league there is split, top four against bottom four. And we saw which characteristics helped the top four teams against the bottom teams. But also we looked at the characteristics between them, which is helping what most. So that was really good um, for practical reasons for the trainers to understand what they need to work on to help what they want to improve. So, for example, we were looking into body composition, aerobic fitness, speed and acceleration, strength and power, and we saw what complements what most. So, also now the trainers in Malta have this information in hand, which they can work on.
And from your side, in terms of your academic learning, do you feel that is a journey that will never end? You always want to kind of improve. You always want to educate yourself.
Definitely. So we're always looking at books, as you mentioned, they're really important. So there are something I will mention later, like Yuri Verkhoshansky super training book. It's like the Bible of strength and conditioning, So that is good for your foundations. But then there are 100,000 sports science journals being published a year, So it's also good to keep updated, but it's also really difficult to sift now which studies to look at. But it's really important that you ongoing, even if when I wasn't doing my PhD, I'm still looking at journals, so I keep updated.
And as an outsider myself, not really understanding sports science in any way, not being an expert, and I don't profess to be, but do you have kind of conflicting reports as well? Like one person may say X is right, another person may say Y. Does that happen?
Yeah, so you get a lot of journals also responding to the authors, to each other. So this is why we really need to be careful when we read published studies to not change your toolbox. Sort of, you have a toolbox of what you use usually and what your philosophy is. And okay, from time to time, you're going to maybe change things when you're implementing the research you read, and then apply it, and then get the feedback from the results that happen, and then maybe you would change something, but not always keep changing with the latest thing that comes out. There should be a process to change your philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. I've always thought that. So, with your profile, and I've known you for a good few years now, what I've always found amazing with yourself is your engagement with multi sports. I know you've been involved in football, you've been involved in swimming, sailing, golf. There's probably loads that I've missed as well. Um, what kind of fundamentals within S&C, within performance, kind of translate across all of those sports? Is there kind of a core?
Yes, so this was a result of me going back to Malta and providing this service as well. So as soon as other sports, we're seeing the footballers improving, the swimmers breaking records, and then everyone wanted to start pitching in to SNC, and I started getting questions from golfers, from sailors, and of course, it
Amazing.
was challenging for me because I knew nothing about golf. So I had to look into the normative data of the sport. I had to look at the epidemiology of the injuries, what are the most common injuries. And I tried many of the sports myself also. So you get that feel, So when you're coaching, you know how to speak. But there
Exactly.
was this
Yeah.
lack, which was really needed in Malta. At the time, there was no one doing SNC. So this is where it came from. Um, what I can say from multisport, it helps me a lot in what I'm doing now. So from my previous experiences, for example, I was for 2 years with the national artistic swimming team of Hungary. Um, so the artistic swimmers, they're really strengthening their groins underwater. So there's a lot of specific things we do for groin management, groin pain, groin strength, which from that experience, now I can manage better the football players and deal with the issues we get in football when it comes to growing management.
Oh, great. So you definitely find that there is a kind of translation between all sports. You definitely feel that there's things that you can take from the golf that you can kind of put into the football side of performance, and kind of vice versa.
Yes, and something else good from St. Mary's University is that they prepared us not for a specific sport, or specific exercises. So, like, exercises and sports were never mentioned. What were mentioned were the biomechanical movements, biomechanical principles, which then you can apply to whatever you want. Yes, a lot of the sports have their own specific exercises which have been done historically, which sometimes are not justified, but coaches have been doing them for years because they were doing people coaches before them were doing them. So you have to look into that. But there are, for example, there are specific strengthening for the wrists when it comes to fighters, such as judo, boxing, and so on. So of course there are those specific niches within the sports as well.
Awesome, awesome. While we're continuing this interview as well, if anybody wants to ask any questions, please feel free. We've got our producer behind the scenes who will raise any questions on the screen. So please feel free to ask any questions to Nigel or myself during the interview. Again, amazingly, you've had the opportunity to work within the Olympics
Yes.
with Olympic athletes for the Maltese Olympic Committee. I think it's at two Olympics.
3 Olympic Games. So I went as a coach
Fantastic, amazing.
to 3 Olympic Games. I've been to two because I had to miss out on the Tokyo one because of the COVID restrictions. But I had five
Wow.
athletes in the Rio one. Um, I had two sailors from Seychelles, two from Egypt, and one from Algeria, which they were training in Malta at the time with sail coach. Uh, the experience is outstanding. Like the first time you go to the Olympic Games, you're I read a lot of psychology papers which states how overwhelming it is for athletes, but there isn't this information about coaches. And I can tell you it's also overwhelming for coaches, because when we stepped in the gym, so in Rio we had this massive tent, um, and you get all the top athletes training in there, and all of a sudden I see Usain Bolt and Michael Phelps training next to us, and you get that imposter syndrome, and you are like, should I be here? Should I be not? So it's very, very overwhelming, and it's a transition that from a fan you become a professional. So I've always looked at the Olympic Games, never missed an event, and then all of a sudden I am there, and it happens really quickly. That realization. So it's really, the first one was really overwhelming. But thanks to that experience, it helped me to get the athletes for Tokyo and for Paris. It helped me to also speak with them and make sure that they're ready for this experience and so on. So
So personally, it must have been kind of a real kind of high pressure environment. And kind of, how did that kind of influence your career moving forward? You mentioned imposter syndrome. It's something that we talk with so many of our candidates about. Like, am I right to be here? Do I feel that I should be at this level? You doubt yourself, and it's a common theme. A lot of people happens at Premier League level, at non-league level. How did you kind of manage that kind of high pressure and kind of that environment which you felt, should I be here?
okay, so this started also before getting to Rio, when I started getting national athletes, and it was my first year of coaching. For example, national swimmer athletes, you start thinking about, I'm gonna mess up at national level. What if they don't get records? What if they get injured? You start getting all these doubts. But then once you start achieving and you start getting more experience, you start enlarging your toolbox of what worked in the past. You can tackle the issues and the performance management going forward better. And then you have to convince yourself that, hey, if I am here and they are here, we are here both for a reason. Like we both worked for it, So then you start to settling in.
Exactly.
But definitely time and experience, and of course, if you get achievements, they start helping you believe more in the work you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great answer. Great answer moving forward. So let's focus on the football side of things now. I know you're at a number of clubs in Malta on the men's side, and then the transition to Brickakara. Is that the right
Yes,
pronunciation? I
yes.
think it is. Women's team as head strength and conditioning, implementing sports science philosophies, introducing periodization within the development programs, which actually evolved them to get to European competition, I believe, in the Champions League. What was that like to set up? Because I can imagine when you first came in, there wasn't much in terms of setup there originally.
No, so as you just said, we had the men's team, and then I was transitioned also to the women's team. There was training 3 times a week, not going to the gym for injury prevention. There was no aerobic program. There was no periodization. There was lack of tests, lack of supplements. Um, so we had to introduce all this change. Now, the main coach and myself going into this, it was our first experience. Myself, it was my first experience, and the coach was his second experience going into women's football. So we had to learn how to tone down the intensity of the training sessions because we were trying to obviously going with the mentality that we're still at the men's sessions. Like we were used to the intensity of the men's sessions. So we had to get used to that. But the turnaround from the women was really quick. They all bought in what we were doing. Um, so the commitment from the girls is something that you're going to get much more than the men's players. So sort of the men's players are used to getting what they want and whatnot. Everywhere in the world, I think is the same, that the men's football is a bit more taken care of than the women. So whatever you do with the women's team, they're going to appreciate it a bit more, and they really look into what you're doing. So we had a really good turnaround. We implemented the gym structure, we implemented the aerobic fitness, we put in the nutrition, started to get the physio in also. So yeah, that was good. And we went to the Champions League and got the first ever win for a Maltese club ever going to I think they were going to the Champions League for 7 years prior, and their best result was a draw. So when we went in, and then we did it 3 consecutive times. So now also other teams, they broke that ceiling that, hey, we can win in the Champions League. So even the ones that come after us now can believe and also push for a higher standard and level.
And I think something you touched upon there, I think so many individuals make that mistake. They go into a women's environment within football and they try to bring the philosophy from a men's environment. It's a very, very different environment on the pitch and off the pitch. You've got to be bespoke, you've got to be niche. And that's something that I found at a project that I was involved in Saudi Arabia. You cannot paint all projects the same. And it's something that was really, really interesting that you mentioned there. So with that success in Malta, I know how proactive you were to find that next opportunity. I know how much kind of Jobs for Football supported and helped on that. You found the opportunity with Lexington on the job board, which is great. So, what was that kind of significant transatlantic move from Europe to America? How did it come about? What are the main differences that you saw from Europe to obviously what you're walked into in the US?
Okay, so one, I'm in a small city in the US, but it's twice the size of my country. So on a personal level, Again, there's like that process, that slight overwhelming process that you need to get used to your surroundings. You left everything behind and whatnot. But for
Yeah.
myself in Malta, I was gaining the knowledge and gaining the experience, but the funding and the setup was missing. So there was like that limiting factor that I couldn't push through. So I was getting, okay, like coaching experience, a lot of hours in. We're going to Champions League, the knowledge, the research, I could always research, see what not. But then there was not the structure, so we would not get the trainer and the physio in every day. We didn't have a gym for ourselves. We didn't have the software or access to a lot of technology, which I had to buy myself at the time. Um, so this was my major push to get into a professional environment. The difference is between the sides. I think in Europe it's a bit more competitive, so there's that element more of competition, which would beat the American side. And then when it comes to football wise, the European football is more tactical, whether the American one is more physical, coming from the, because obviously here you have the college system, which is really advanced when it comes to SNC. So coming out of that college system, the
Yeah.
mentality is run, 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 hit, hit, hit. And the biggest challenge in the US is game management, meaning you're 1-0 up,
Mm.
what you should do with the ball, what you should do with possession. And you can be as physically fit as you want, but if you're going to be chasing the ball all game around, you're going to exhaust yourself, you know. So that
Yeah.
is one of the major challenges that I think is
Mm.
um, is found here.
And is that something that you've found that obviously, as we know, the college system is unbelievably financed. Some of the S&C departments are miles ahead even of the Premier League
The
clubs
pro.
here in the UK, some of them. So are you finding that when they come into the USL changing rooms, a lot of them, majority of them have had that experience and background before, so they do tend to kind of pick up on things a little bit quicker?
Definitely 100%. So in Malta, one of the major issues, and even other parts in Europe, not just in Malta. So when you're getting the adult athlete in the room, you need to teach them the basics of how to squat, how to move, how to do the clean and jerk, how to do Olympic lifts, and apart from the exercises themselves, also the lifestyle, how they take care of their body, what type of
Mm.
supplements, what type of rest, what type of recovery elements, whether the athletes I get here are already exposed to that, so it makes life easier and we can really get on with the work rather than revisiting the basics or teach them from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of given you kind of that head start, really. Because the next question that I was going to ask, obviously, you're looking after the men's side of things and the women's side at the football club. So
Yes.
when you're developing that high performance ecosystem, what did you kind of walk into? What did you see? And kind of what technologies have you implemented? What methodologies have you implemented? Kind of moving forward since you've been there.
Okay, so as you said, the college system from the pro club system, there's a difference. Okay, so when we're speaking about the specific case of Lexington, they are a new club, and within 3 years, they got two pro teams implemented. So they're sprinting ahead, and which brought about some difficulty. So certain departments were not created already, especially the performance side of things. When I came in, there was no data collection or tests being done or structures and protocols in place. So, and it's fair on the club because within 3 years to have two proteins, that's a lot of moving parts. So they have everything in place, like the facilities, and which we're still ongoing to improve, and the both squads in. But then the structure wasn't holding it together. The protocols of what we should do, the philosophy of training and whatnot. So I came in, and apart from dealing to having to move to country, I was dealing with this as well, that I had to straight into it and get things moving on implementing the structures here. So we started by seeing what's available. So we had all the technology as well. So we have the GPS system, which is the most common. We have force plates as well, and other body composition metrics that we use. We started regularly. The first thing we started was monitoring the players. So throughout the week, we monitor their counter movement jump, and we can give feedback to the coaches on their readiness. We introduced readiness questionnaires. So every morning, the players can identify any soreness. We can see any patterns that are developing throughout the weeks, maybe in some areas, so we can tackle it. We introduced RPE because no matter what technology you use, it is important that we realize that we're working with the end user, because sometimes we're getting too lost in numbers, but we sort of ignore what the players are feeling. So that is why the RP is one of the most inexpensive methods to use, and it's really effective because we can identify the internal loads of the players. Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge was communication. So I had to bring all the departments to communicate together. So because there was no structure, we had the nutritionists coming in doing their thing. We had the trainers, which are physios in Europe, coming in doing their own thing. There was myself, the SNC coach, and the performance doing our own thing. So we had to implement something, a structure in place to get everyone together and to communicate. So that was the biggest challenge to get, because of course coming in, getting people to not change what they're doing but to communicate together, and sometimes you have to reach a halfway point. So that is something that
Of
we had
course.
to overcome, but yeah.
And I think it's something in every job role, and I speak about it so many times, change management. Sometimes changes for the better, but it's very difficult because people are used to doing what they want to do. So sometimes that is a big hurdle. But from what you're saying, everything seems very, very positive. I think you had a great preseason. You won the first game.
Yes, and now we have the second one
Fantastic,
on Saturday in Orange County, so looking forward.
fantastic. Good luck for that.
Thank you.
Good luck for that. So kind of just ending and kind of finishing up on a couple of technical kind of questions that a couple of individuals have asked me to ask you. Um, there was a webinar that you did about periodization, strength and aerobic training in football. The question here is, can you elaborate on your approach to periodization throughout a competitive season, particularly addressing how you balance the competing demands of technical training, tactical work, and physical development? That was the
Cool.
question.
Okay. So being within the American system also, that brings its own challenges for this. So we have the USL Super League, which follows the European calendar. That's the where the women's side compete, and we get a couple of weeks breaks in between. We had the Christmas break as well, and now we have another break coming up, a 2 week break and whatnot. The men's team has another challenge, which the USL Championship starts now in March, and it's till November without any breaks in between. So there's no international breaks like we are used to having in Europe. And why am I saying this? Because in Europe, what we would do, which I am doing with the women's league, is you start your preseason, but then you sort of revisit the preseason again within those international breaks that you get. Because historically, what people used to do was used to train really hard, really heavy in the preseason, and then lay it off, and then you get that decline, and by January, you've lost everything. So ideally, what you want to do is you
Yeah.
want to keep cycling this throughout the season to get multiple peaks to survive until May. So that is why the European calendar is good, because unless you have the issue of having too many international players, because then that hinders this process. But um, so within those breaks, we revisit what we do, the general preparation in the preseason. So like this, we keep the multiple peaks going. When it comes to the USL, we have championship. We have to think about it more as a marathon. So these players have no breaks. So I have to introduce the microdose system. So here, less is better, but we still do specific things, but we just do them to touch up throughout the season, and then we have to manage on the minutes they're being played. Now on technical, we have an aerobic program. So we cycle it throughout the season, which is a 4 week cycle. We have 3 weeks loading, 1 week off, and then we have the strength cycle in which we use contrast training, where we go with a heavy movement and a powerful movement all throughout the year, all throughout the competitive season to prepare the player for the weekend. And then whenever we have a break, we try to go back to general preparation where we work more on high repetition and get the ligaments and tendons ready for the heavier loads. Maybe a lot
That
there
makes
too.
from that side. Is it just the first team, Nigel, that you work with, or is it also an academy side of things? Does that differ from a kind of more of a kind of senior team to an academy? Would that be a similar approach?
So we started now writing up the philosophy on how everyone should follow as well, within adjustments according to the age groups, of course. So we're implementing the peak height velocity monitoring as well, and what you should do with the load when that's occurring, and what you should change between football and strength, volumes. Yes, the academy also, we need to make sure that they're ready for the demands before they switch to pro. So we're also monitoring them. So yeah, we try to implement one philosophy, but adjust it to the age groups as you go down.
Age groups. Awesome, awesome, fantastic. From one last question, if I can.
Sure.
I know you're a very busy man. Hamstring injuries. So everybody always talks about hamstring injuries, especially within football. One of the most problematic issues within the sport. This question, based on your experience across multiple sports and performance environments, what do you consider to be the most effective preventative approach, and how have advances in technology and research shaped your strategy?
Okay. So there's
Good
not
question.
one, yes, there's not, um, so it's not one magical thing that you have to look at, because a lot of people try to look at one thing, for example, the Nordic curls, and say, okay, it's just Nordic curls and so on, but that's not everything. We have this 4 point approach. So aerobic fitness, eccentric loading, firing rate, and the mobility around the hip. So we have these 4 points to monitor to prevent as much as possible hamstring strength. So what do I mean? We need to make sure that our athlete is aerobically fit, something which a lot of people do not or underestimate. But when our players are breaking down technique because they are not aerobically fit, this is when their running gait is going down and their technique is breaking down. So that is really, really important. And that's maybe one of the easiest to explain. Now, the mobility around the hip. So it's really important to allow the hamstring to operate in what it needs to do. So it's working eccentrically when we are sprinting. So it's being stretched under tension. So if it's already has a lack of range of motion, you are more in risk of injury. And that could come from lower back issues, from tight hip flexors, which are um, limiting the range of motion. And now the most important two things are the eccentric loading. So this is why we don't do exercises like leg curl, for example, in the gym. So it's a good rehabilitation exercise, but it is contracting the muscle in a concentric manner, which is not what's happening when you're sprinting. So when you are sprinting in the late phase of the swing, your hamstring is slowing down the extension of the knee. So it's slowing down the tibia from going forward at high speeds. And that's happening by stretching the muscle under tension in an eccentric way. And that is where the Nordic curl became really popular, because it's an eccentric exercise. But when we are doing the Nordic curl, the issue with it is that we're working bipedal and we are not working unilaterally. So if there's some imbalances between left and right, it's not being addressed and sometimes becoming worse. So this is why I don't even do that. And what we do is the one leg RDL is really important because it's also what the Nordic curl is not giving you apart from the left and right imbalances issues, the co-contraction with other muscles. So when you're running, you have your quad firing, your glutes firing, your hamstrings, and your calf working. And these are not working when you're working in an isolated exercise, such as the Nordic curl, but they are working with the one leg RDL. So to tell you what the one leg RDL is a deadlift, but you're starting from the top going down and you're doing unilaterally. So you're doing it on one leg. But this doesn't address everything. So what we do with the one leg RDL is giving us the capacity of a high centric load, which is part of the puzzle that we need. But the last thing that I mentioned is also the firing rate of the muscle. So whatever is happening is also happening at high speeds, and the eccentric pull is happening at a really high speed. So if your body doesn't is not accustomed to this, and then that's where the firing rate is not happening fast enough, and this is where the tears occurs or strains. And this is why exposure to sprints is the best sort of remedy as well to hamstring strain. So we need to make sure that we have enough exposure to sprints within the week of training. Now, through experience, you're gonna learn how much is that exposure needed to be, and when as well, and all the timing that comes into it. Yeah, so it's quite a multifaceted way to deal with the hamstring injuries.
So basically, Nigel, what you're saying is Lexington Sporting Club fans have not got to worry about any hamstring injuries this season. Is that correct?
Touch wood, we had no issues last year, and with the girls so far, it's been a good run. So yeah, always touching
Awesome,
wood, so that's
awesome,
good.
awesome. I think we've got one more question.
Go ahead.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the mental game, worries, doubts, afraid of failure, pressures, expectations, and how this affects the player's performance? What are your thoughts on the I think that says mental game, not metal game, but yeah. So probably more on the psychological side of things. But how would that interact with your performance department?
Yes, so it has to be part of your, as I mentioned before as well, part of your toolbox. So sometimes, and I mentioned as well about the RPE, sometimes you have to walk away from just sets and repetitions, which is very easily something you get trapped in. We're always reading the research, and you're just talking about sets, repetitions, and loads, and introduce the mental aspect as well within your training to get the players ready. So the way we speak with them, some verbal words that you're using, you make them realize as well about the situation they are in, and you try manage being underpowered. So in that state that you're too relaxed, but then not too anxious, and you try get them within that zone, which is obviously very difficult. It's something you need to address because also certain crampings and certain shortness of breath, sometimes it happens because players are too anxious going into a game. So it is something that you have to work on throughout the week, and you have to do it by creating more challenging drills, challenging tasks within your training regime, and not just think about the physical aspect, which is something that's common to just fall into, because that's all we study about, and maybe the mental side is quite still neglected. So
I agree. Do you have a psychologist within the football club,
yes,
Nigel?
so we have access to a psychologist. As I said before, this department was quite separated, but now we're getting everything together. So there's better communication, and everyone puts their piece of the puzzle for the final report about the player.
Great, fantastic answer. I think that question came from LinkedIn. Don't think there are any more questions, Nigel. From my side, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated. Really good insight, and I'm glad Jobs for Football could be that catalyst to help you
Yes,
in terms of your
definitely. Thank
career
you.
on
Thank
the
you for the
pitch.
past, and all the advice given in the past was definitely helpful, especially when you are transitioning from an amateur semi-pro environment to a professional environment. There is nothing preparing you for what to come, when it comes to contract wise, paper wise, moving wise, protocol wise. So yes, that's definitely where Jobs for Football was very, very helpful.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I will look out for the game, for the result on Saturday. Orange County. Was it away, did you say?
Away, yes,
Away
yes.
fixture? Awesome. Brilliant. Brilliant. Now, look forward to that. And again, Nigel, thank you so much for your time. It's
Okay.
much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. See you.
Thank you so much. Cheers, guys. Thank you, everybody. And look forward to next week's podcast.